Good morning. Nice to see you guys. 2 weeks ago now, I think this is our third week, we started the beginning of August. As school launched up, we launched into our new ministry season. And we started this new series called Made for More. And that series, the whole point of this thing, every August, we talk about who we are as a church, the unique things that God is doing in us, and where we see ourselves going in this next year. And so what we were talking about with this idea of Made for More is this belief that, man, when you see the amazing things that God is doing through you as a church, when you actually start to see the stuff that's happening and what's there, and you get a taste for that, how could you not want more? How could we not find ourselves being like, that's amazing, I want more of that? And so we've been trying each week to look at what these things are. And in week one, we talked about how God has made us a church without walls. And Glenn talked about, man, we want more people to experience more belonging around here. That's an opportunity that's been happening, and that's something that we feel like is in front of us. Last week, we looked at how we as a church are becoming a different kind of church for people who are leaving religion behind, and how important that is right now, and the kinds of people that are coming and feeling safe here at Costas, and what that looks like. That's a big deal, and we want more of that, more people on mission and vision. And this week, I want to talk about being the kind of church that sees life change from the inside out, right? The kind of church that sees life change from the inside out, in hopes that we would become a church and continue to be a church who desires even more life change in a real way. Some time ago, I sat at lunch with a gentleman who, he began to tell me his story. He said he grew up in a household where he felt like love was conditional all the time. That was the phrase he used. And he said, it was weird. It felt like some moments his parents liked him, other moments it seems like they didn't, and all of that got really complicated. He said it got especially hard during his late teens when his parents started going through a divorce. And he said during that time, it was really hard on his family. His dad essentially got really angry and poured himself into alcoholism. And it just was this ongoing thing that's what his family started to look like. His dad moved into one house and where he was drinking a lot and was really, really angry. His mom moved into another house, and he said she was just hurting and she felt like she'd lost her value and so many of these different things. And he said, I told him, I was like, what was that like for you? And he goes, as a son, I just found myself trying to figure out how to make my dad less angry and how to operate in ways where he just wouldn't explode, or where some of these different things, just wouldn't go that direction. He said, and for my mom, I was just trying to let her know she has value and she matters and I appreciate her and all these things. And he said this phrase, enough was never really enough. It was really, really hard. I remember looking at him in that moment and going, that's hard. Because the truth is I told him this, I said, you're a kid, they're your parents. It's not the other way around. Like, it's hard to carry that level of something on their behalf, isn't it? And he just looked at me like that was the most obvious thing in the world that I had just said. He's like, yeah. And then he said, at one point in time, I just decided, if life is a mess and people are a mess, I'm tired of being the only one who's not a mess. And he's like, I just blew my life up. I made a bunch of decisions and a bunch of things and was just like, I want to feel that I'm going to be that same type of thing. And I looked and I said, did that make it better? Did you like that? And he just said, no. In fact, it got worse. He said, at first it felt like this weight was lifted off of his back. And then as time continued, pretty quickly, it felt like more and more was heaped on. He said, I started getting to the spot where I didn't like who I was when I looked in the mirror. And I didn't like the person that I was becoming. And I didn't like how other people saw me. And I felt kind of trapped and I felt a little bit helpless. And he said, it was one of the worst seasons of depression he'd been in his life. And it was interesting because I'm sitting there having lunch with him, and the person I'm talking to doesn't feel like the person he's describing. Have you ever had that moment with somebody? So I just looked at him and I said, what changed? Because the person I'm talking to feels different than what I'm hearing. And he said, I started dating someone, and she went to a church, and she was religious, and I was never religious growing up. Like, that wasn't a thing that we did. And so she invited me to go to church, and I thought, okay. And so I went. He went to church with her, and he said, I walked in, and there's this guy who was teaching on this particular day, and he seemed really put together. Like, he seemed like his life wasn't chaotic and crazy like my life, and it wasn't all the other things. And he spoke confidently and clearly, and he talked about this idea that sometimes in our lives, right, we'll clean up our houses because if things get too messy, it feels chaotic and out of control. And he said, in the same way we clean up our houses, sometimes we need to clean up our lives because if things get too crazy or chaotic, it can feel like it was out of control. And he said, I heard that message, I heard that sermon, and it resonated with me in the deepest of ways because I felt like my life was an absolute mess. He did. It's like I felt like my life was just everywhere and a mess and out of control. And he found himself thinking, I'm going to do what this guy's telling me to do. I'm going to do what this church is telling me to do. I'm going to start cleaning it up. That was his phrase. And he said, I left that place and I prayed to God to help me. And he said, I started by doing 2 things. I said, what were they? He said, I went home and I cleaned my room and I made a haircut appointment. And I was not expecting him to say that at all. I really wasn't. I said, what was it about a haircut? He goes, a new me for a new era. And he literally was like, I changed everything about me. That's the phrase he used. He said, I stopped hanging out with people that I saw as bad influences. I started reading the Bible for the first time. I started going to church. I stopped doing bad things. I stopped listening to bad things. I tried to stop thinking bad things. And I just stopped all the bad things that I could possibly think about. And I just started trying to clean my life up. And I worked hard at that. And he said, and it was crazy because people around me noticed and they started to see me as like, wow, that guy's going somewhere. He said he got asked to be a volunteer in the church that he was at. He said his dad looked at him and said, I can tell that something's different than what it used to be. And man, he'd wanted to hear words like that from his dad for a long time. His mom looked at him and said, I'm so proud of you. I can see all the ways that you've changed. And that resonated in this like really, really deep way for him. And then he said, and the worst part was, because I wasn't expecting him to say the worst part. He said, and the worst part was I was just miserable. I was like, what do you mean you were miserable? It seems like you're describing like all of this really good stuff. And I said, and why are we talking if you had this amazing church that you loved? And why aren't you there? Like, what happened? And he said, I stopped going to that church. I stopped being a part of this because the truth is I'd cleaned up everything. I cleaned my life up. I cleaned myself up. I cleaned up everything, and yet I was still the same me inside. I was still so sad and angry and frustrated and miserable, and this time it was worse. I said, what made it worse? He said, it's because before I was a mess and everybody could see it and they knew it and it was okay. And he goes, and now no one can see it, and I feel alone, and I feel isolated, and I'm angry. And so I said, is that why you wanted to talk with me today? And he goes, no, I wanted to talk with you because I wanted to share my story. I wanted you to see where I'd been and what I'd been through in some of those different pieces. And they said, but I have a question that I want to ask you. And I said, what is it? And he looked and he said, how do you really change your life? That was the question. How do you really change your life? And he looked at me with such earnest sincerity as he asked that question. Guys, that's a big question, isn't it? Isn't that a huge question to ask somebody? How do you really change your life? But it's an honest one. You know, I find myself thinking, how many of us came to church at one point in time? Maybe it was your first time you came. Maybe it was sometime down the road, but you found yourself coming to church or entering back into religion in some way because you found yourself saying, I want my life to be different than what it actually is right now. How many of you have ever found yourself like that young man in that moment where you look in the mirror and you don't like who you're becoming or what that is? And so that energy brought you to church. And it brought you to a space where you said, I need religion, I need God, I need something different because I don't like how this is going and I want something in my life to change. Or how many of us have ever found ourselves looking and you look at your life like that gentleman did and you're just like, my life feels like a mess. And it feels like it's all over and it's crazy and all these things. And so there's some part of us that suddenly looks and goes, I need to go clean this thing up. And I think God can help me do that. And this group of people, they can help do this. And so sometimes we find ourselves going to church or coming back to a community because we think, I want my life to change. I just need to clean all of this stuff up. And that's the thing that I need help with, right? And we do this at times. And I watch people do this at times. And the hard part is on occasion, there's moments where someone does all of these pieces. And much like that young man, they go, I changed everything. And it just didn't change me because we still are looking for the place where real life change actually occurs. And so I want to explore this a little bit this morning. And the reason why is I think God is using you as a church to actually step into people's lives in ways that's actually transformational in the deepest of ways. I keep seeing God use you all in ways where he's changing people's lives, not just in an exterior type of way, not just in a new haircut type of way. I'm talking about in like a deep type of way that's actually transformative in their lives. There's something happening here, and I think it's because you're tapping into something that's really true and really important. And I want to look at what that piece is today because I think God has more for us. And I think there's more, in fact, to come. We're going to look at a story that's found in the life of Jesus. It's in the book of Matthew, but it's also in the book of Mark. We're going to look at Mark's account today, Mark chapter 7. If you want to turn there ahead of time, feel free. But there's this moment where the religious leaders, they come up to Jesus and they essentially say, why aren't you telling your disciples to clean up their act? Why aren't you telling the disciples to clean up what it is that they're doing and to change the way this goes? And it's because they're after something, they want something that they think is what life change actually looks like. And Jesus redirects this conversation in a really powerful way. And I think contained in his answer is an answer for us to that question about where real life change actually begins. And I'll say it this way just to kick us off. It's this. We often think that life change is about cleaning up our lives, but it's actually about changing our hearts. We often think that life change is about cleaning up our lives, but it's actually a change that starts to occur by wrestling with our hearts. It's at the heart level. And we're going to see this in Mark chapter 7. If you have your Bibles, we're going to begin at verse 1, right at the top of the chapter. It says, "Now when the Pharisees and some of the scribes who had come from Jerusalem gathered around him being Jesus." Verse 2, "They noticed that some of his disciples were eating with defiled hands, that is, without washing them." Just look at that real quick in verse 2 and recognize they didn't just say their hands were dirty and they were defiled. Like, that's a big sentence, isn't it? Verse 3, "For the Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they wash their hands, thus observing the tradition of the elders. They do not eat anything from the market unless they wash. And there are also many other traditions that they observe, the washing of cups and pots and of bronze kettles and beds." Verse 5, "So the Pharisees and the scribes asked Jesus, 'Why do your disciples not walk according to the tradition of the elders, but eat with defiled hands?'" Which is their way of saying, why are they doing it wrong? That really is, very straightforwardly. This is not a curious question, you guys. This whole moment is not some moment where like, how interesting that Jesus does that. I wonder what he knows that we don't. That's not what's happening there. They're coming up to Jesus and they're like, I don't like this. I don't like what I see happening. So let's unpack it. The short and sweet of it, the religious leaders, a group of people known as the Pharisees, they were the most prominent religious leaders in the first century for the Jewish people, and a group of people called the scribes. These are your Old Testament scholars who specialize in the first 5 books of your Old Testament, called the law, right? These people, religious leaders and people who have all kinds of religious scholarship, they see Jesus' disciples not washing their hands before they eat, and this is a big deal. They are frustrated with him. And I think we can get the frustration on some level, because how many of us wash our hands before we eat or after we use the bathroom? There's a practical side to this, where cultures all around the world, regardless of what you believe, seem to do this because it stops the spread of infection, disease, and those types of things. So we know there's this very practical side to washing your hands. That's why many of us do it, right? And we make that happen. Well, you have to understand, for the Jewish people, the washing of hands before a meal was way deeper than that. It wasn't just that it was practical, it was actually seen as deeply spiritual. They thought of this as consecrating themselves before God. They thought of this as preparing themselves actually to be before a holy God who's pure and all these things. They thought all of that. There was so much meaning and significance, and there's 2 reasons for this. First, if you've ever heard Christians around you perhaps say the phrase, your body is a temple, and they're often, I think, quoting Paul from Corinthians when they say that, you know that that's not a new thought that Paul was saying and speaking when he writes that in the book of Corinthians. Paul was a Pharisee. Pharisees, that's what he was before he was this amazing leader and evangelist that moves throughout the Gentile world or the non-Jewish world. Paul was a Pharisee. The Pharisees believed that your body was a temple. They believed that. They saw this way. And so you were to honor this and the way you operated with this and all these things. They held this as a deep belief. So you should treat it as such and consecrate it as such. And that's a way of honoring God who is with you and within you and all those things. Second, the Pharisees saw Israel as a nation of priests because in Exodus 19, right? These are people who know, the scribes, the Pharisees, they know the text. In Exodus 19, God looks at the people and he says, "For you shall be unto me a nation of priests." Not a nation with priests, but I want a relationship with you that's like everyone's a priest, is basically what God is speaking. We teach this around here as a church because it's such a big moment in the story of the Old Testament. The way we'll phrase it is, we'll say, you know what he means there is that God wants to have a direct relationship with you where no priest is needed. He doesn't need to talk through another person. He talks to you and you relate to him directly. You get this. But for the Pharisees, their interpretation of this in the first century was that in the same way, since God had spoken and said, "For you shall be unto me a nation of priests," that all of the codes and laws and things that applied to the priests in terms of honoring themselves and honoring what they were doing with God, that they should follow those things too, even if they weren't the ones leading out temple worship. And so they would read a passage like Exodus chapter 30, which instructs the Jewish priests to actually wash themselves and clean themselves before they go and put food on the altar to give it to God as an offering and then consume it later. They would ultimately look and be like, that hand washing and that cleansing of yourself to go before the presence of a holy God, we should be doing that too. We should be walking out that same exact process, and they held it that way. The religious leaders, they read these Old Testament passages and they thought, in the same way that the priests need to honor God and and do this, we should. In the same way that we all are the temple, we should treat it like this. And so this hand washing thing and cleansing themselves thing, this is about a deeply spiritual, significant thing about who you are and are you right before God and all of these things. This process begins to occur that happens anytime somebody within a religious system takes their beliefs seriously. And it's this, it starts with reading something and then having a scriptural interpretation. I read the text, and so I thought to myself, okay, this is what I most think about that. And because you take it seriously, or this matters to you, you go, and now I'm going to practice it. Right? I read this, I interpret it, so now I'm going to practice this in my life. You practice something long enough, it eventually becomes tradition. It becomes this thing that you do on an ongoing basis. Tradition, lived long enough, starts to become widely accepted belief and understanding, and it becomes doctrine. Even starts to be followed like law. And all of a sudden, what started as biblical interpretation becomes the truth of God for all people, always. And everyone's just like, yeah, of course it is, because that's just how we do it. That's how they thought about it. So the religious leaders, they come to Jesus and they say, you're doing it wrong. Jesus, you aren't teaching your disciples correctly. In fact, they're dishonoring themselves. They're dishonoring you as a teacher. They're dishonoring God. They are defiled. Think about that word and the intensity of that word. Imagine if you walked out of the bathroom and I noticed you didn't wash your hands and I was like, defiled. Like, that's a horrible moment, isn't it? That's awful, isn't it? I know. It's a big statement that they make. And they're essentially saying, and so you need to teach them rightly. They need to clean themselves up. They need to change. They need to clean themselves up. You know what's interesting? Is how Jesus responds to this criticism. Because imagine yourself, like I know we've talked about the history and some beliefs and things, but go back to the moment. Imagine yourself and you're a leader and you're leading maybe kids or students or adults or whoever it is you lead. And somebody comes up to you and they say to you, hey, you're doing it wrong. You're actually letting these people defile themselves. And ultimately you're not respecting the text. And this is what we do, or the tradition or what really matters. And they say that to you. What do? We don't, like, our immediate response is, well, no, here's what I believe that text actually means, and here's how I believe this is, and we start talking about hand washing, and we start talking about interpretation, and we start talking about practice, because I'm going to defend myself and convince you that this is the way I think. That's the way most of us approach moments like these. Jesus doesn't do that. Jesus does something completely different. In fact, it catches me off guard when I read through it. Jesus essentially, his answer to the question is to turn to them and essentially say, why do you keep missing the point? Mark chapter 7, verse 6, he said to them, Isaiah prophesied rightly about you hypocrites, as it is written, this people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. Their hearts miss the point. In vain do they worship me, teaching human precepts as doctrines. You abandon the commandment of God and you hold to human tradition. And then he said to them, you have a fine way of rejecting the commandment of God in order to keep your tradition. And this is Jesus looking at them saying, you started by interpreting the Bible, then you put it into practice, and then that became tradition, and now you're treating it like doctrine, and you're holding people to it. And somewhere along the way, you miss the heart of God within the text itself. And this isn't doing good, it's doing harm. In Matthew's account of this thing, he refers to the Pharisees as blind guides who lead one another astray. And he says anything that they planted will eventually be uprooted because it's not going to bear any fruit. It doesn't do the thing. This doesn't take you where you most want it to go. Jesus goes so far as to tell them in this particular moment, you are rejecting what God really wants. You're missing his heart in order to justify your beliefs and doctrines and interpretations here. And you're missing the point. And then he continues, and he doesn't talk about hand washing. He actually talks about honoring your father and mother and something called Corban, which is like another sermon for another time. And then he gets to verse 13 and he says, and you do many things like this, meaning that's just another illustration. But guys, this is all over the place. This is like something that you're actually dealing with on a regular basis. Guys, this is a really big deal. Because when we find ourselves walking that same path where we miss the heart of God because we're holding on to some doctrine or tradition or interpretation or whatever that might be, and we miss the heart of God, it's just like the text says, we speak of God on our lips, but our hearts don't look like who he really is. We speak of Jesus, we just don't look like him. And it starts to get really strange. Jesus says these really hard things to the religious leaders, but there's a crowd there watching. Imagine being in the crowd. And he says this to the religious leaders, and the crowd's got to be looking, being like, Mom and Dad are fighting right now, right? This is out of our pay grade. We don't know what to do. Jesus suddenly turns and he addresses the crowd because he knows there's an audience, and he speaks these words, which are actually a parable to them. Mark chapter 7, verse 14 says, "Then he called the crowd again and he said to them, 'Listen to me, all of you, and understand.'" No pressure. Verse 15, "There is nothing outside a person that by going in can defile, but the things that come out are what defile." That's the thing he says to the crowd. He's like, listen and understand. Now, if you're sitting here and you heard that for the first time today and you're like, that sounds really good, Jesus, I have no idea what he's talking about, you're in great company. You are. Even the disciples who heard that at the moment had no idea what he was talking about. I remember I was taking a class called Christianity and Western Culture in college, and the professor was brilliant. It's like one of those professors that's like too smart for his own good and hard to understand sometimes. You know what I'm talking about? And he's speaking on all these things, and he would say these profound statements, and people in the room would start writing furiously, and there would be like audible moans of agreement. You ever been in that room where people are saying something and everyone's like, and they're writing as fast as they can? And he said something on one particular day, and I can hear just like audible moans of agreement all around me and people writing really quickly. I had no idea what he was talking about. I wished I did. I tried. I did not understand. But a friend of mine was sitting there next to me, like moaning out loud in agreement and writing. And I was like, I'm going to ask him after class because he clearly gets this, like whatever this thing is. Class ends and I go to my friend and I was like, so I don't know if this makes me dumb or not, but when he said that, I had no idea what that meant. And then my friend got kind of sheepish and looked at me and he was like, I don't know. It sounded really important. So I wrote it down and I could hear everybody moaning. So I just pretended. And I learned from that day forward, you should ask more questions. Like, don't trust the room, ask questions. This is what the disciples do. They go home. I don't think the crowd probably understood this. I think they were like, sweet Jesus. And then they go and they find themselves in a room and all of a sudden a hand shoots up from the disciples. Mark chapter 7, verse 17. When he had left the crowd and entered the house, his disciples asked him about the parable. He said to them, so are you also without understanding? He's like, I knew the crowd didn't get it. I didn't know that you didn't get it too. And then he says this, do you not see that whatever goes into a person from outside cannot defile? Because that's what he said earlier. Since it enters not the heart, but the stomach and goes out into the sewer. When it says sewer there, the Greek is far more descriptive. Thus he declared all foods clean. Verse 20, and he said, it is what comes out of a person that defiles. So imagine this. The disciples are now with Jesus. The crowd's not there. The religious leaders aren't there. Hand goes up. Jesus, can I ask you about earlier today? I didn't understand what you meant. And he goes, you didn't understand? Let me explain it this way. And Jesus uses one of the most base level illustrations that I've ever read in the New Testament. He really does. And he goes down to the most common of human experiences that everyone has known and experienced and had a visceral reaction to at one point in time. He talks about the process of human digestion. And it's so funny because when you read through this, I've been reading commentaries all week and just in preparation for this, so many commentaries go, we're not really sure what he was getting at or meaning here, but the end is clear. They say this thing. And I think it's because they just can't bring themselves up to open themselves up to the fact that Jesus is actually talking about feces. That's actually what's happening here. Here's his base level illustration, and he paints this in a way that you and I and every person, his disciples, can absolutely understand. He says, we worry about all the stuff that's outside of us, but it doesn't look like that when it goes in. Human excrement is made inside of us. And that's where it gets gross. That's literally a good way of articulating the way that he's talking about. Now, I know some of you are going to lunch afterwards and you didn't come to church to hear me talk about poop. So let me use a more friendly Sunday morning illustration. Several years ago, I stumbled across somebody selling a Nissan SUV, and it was in really good shape at a really good price, and I just thought, this is like too good to be true, which means it was. My wife's car was getting older, it needed more work, and we had 2 little kids, and I just thought, man, it'd be really nice to give her, a car that's reliable and newer and all that for our kids and her. Like, that would be great. And so I called the guy, and I drove over to his place, because he said, sure, come and take a look at it, see what you think. And when I got there, he said, don't worry about whether you buy this or not. There's like 50 people that have called, I've written all these names down, and so we're just going in order here today, and if you want it, it's yours. If not, don't worry about it. And I said, sure. And I looked at the car, and it was immaculate. Like, it was. The paint was perfect. Like, there were no scratches. I kept thinking, do you not go to a grocery store? Has like no one with a rage cart ever hit you? Like, what is what is this? But no, it was great. The inside was clean and like pristine. And it even had super nice, fancy tires that they'd put on this thing at one point. And I just thought, wow, this is a really well-maintained vehicle. We popped the hood. It was crystal. It was like clean inside and everything looked really good. We turned it on and I took it for a test drive. It sounded fine. It ran fine. It was great. And I was just like, yes. Well, some things aren't too good to be true. Like, yeah, we'll buy the car. Let's do it. And so I bought it. And then 2 weeks later, my wife was driving with our kids in the month of June and the AC was no longer cold and it was just hot. And I was like, no. So I called a friend who happened to be a mechanic to just say, hey, would you be willing to I'm not asking to work on my car. Will you just come look at it and give me some advice? And so he came over and he put a new can of Freon in it and got cold again. He goes, you have a leak in your AC. I don't know where it is or what it is, but that can be expensive to fix. And I was just like, that's not what I want to hear. And he goes, but the truth is, I don't know if I'd even worry about that. That's the least of your problems. And I said, oh, no. Right? And he goes, go ahead and start the engine again. We start the engine. And he goes, I want you to lean in and really listen. He goes, you hear that little sound? And I said, I think so. And he goes, that one. I'm like, oh, yeah, I totally do. He said, so that's the sound of bearings going bad inside of your engine. At some point, somebody overheated this car. And somehow the friction of that with whatever happened there, just caused either the bearings to wear out. And he goes, but I just think it's probably only a matter of time before you find metal shavings when you do an oil change or something like that. He goes, basically, you either need to swap the bearings out on this, which is a lot of work, rebuild the engine, or you're going to need an entirely new engine. Do you know what no one wants to hear when they buy a car? That the thing that makes the car move, the most fundamentally important part of the car itself, is fouled. And I was so frustrated because I looked at him and I said, no, it's a really nice car. And he just looked at me and said, I'm sorry. Yeah, it's a really nice looking vehicle. And it can be like a really nice and most expensive yard ornament you've ever had. Or you can fix it. And I just said, I feel like, but look at the tires. And then he just laughed at me. He's like, Ryan, I can tell you're having a hard time with this. And he goes, you just always have to remember with a car, it's never how it looks on the outside. It's always what's under the hood that matters, which is blatantly obvious for all of us, right? It's what's under the hood that really matters. Do you know that's what Jesus is saying here? His illustration, whether you think it's gross or not, the whole process of this, whether you've connected with it or not, that's what he's saying. Is that when it comes to life, when it comes to growth, when it comes to having our lives changed and following God, it's what's under the hood that actually matters. It's a big deal. And I think that's why he says the following. Mark chapter 7, verse 21, he explains this. He says, for it is from within, from the human heart, that evil intentions come. And then there's this giant list. He says sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, avarice, wickedness, deceit, debauchery, envy, slander, pride, folly. It's quite the list. Right? He starts listing all of these things. Guys, I don't think that list is specific. I think that list is him saying, all of those things that you're going and looking at your life being like, I don't want this to be in my life. I don't want this to be in the world around me. I want my life to change so none of this is actually a part of that. And I want the world to change so that none of this is actually a part of that. I think that's what he's listing. I think he could have added other things, taken some, I don't know. But he's using this like an illustration. Verse 23 says, all these evil things, they come from within. And that's what defiles a person. Guys, when Jesus lists all those things, if you've gotten to the spot in the message where you're like, okay, so he lists all those things because they're wrong, and finally we're going to talk about what's wrong and what's right and all these things, that's not what he's doing here. And I want to address that because I think so often what happens in churches is we think if you want to really create real life change in your life or in the world around you, here's the recipe. You need to tell somebody what is wrong. You need to tell them that it's not okay. And you need to tell them to stop it. And that's how you create real life change. And sometimes we get to a spot like this and we're like, finally, Mark's giving us this list and it's out of the words of Jesus himself. And this is what it is. So this is what we need to speak to. And he's saying that's wrong and that's wrong and that's wrong and that's wrong. But what he's actually doing is the opposite. What he's actually doing with this very thing is he's saying all these things you care about, from sexual morality to murder to folly. Folly is just that moment, you guys, when you find yourself like going, man, I ended up here and I wish I had made the decisions that led me here, right? Folly, a lack of wisdom. He goes all the way from these things and he says all of these things, from the largest of things to the smallest of things, from slander, how we speak about others, all those, it comes from inside the heart. It starts in here. And you know how I can illustrate this for us in a practical way? I want to do something. And this is for me, this is for you. You don't need to look at the person next to you. You don't need to say anything for the next moment. You don't need to raise a hand. I'm just putting all this out there. And here's why. I want you to think about something just for you for just a moment. And all I'm asking you to do is think about something. That's the only activity you'll have to do here. I want you to think about something in your life that you struggle with. I want you to think about the thing in your life that you're like, man, I wish I could change that. Maybe there's a large sin or something like that you've struggled with for a really long time and it feels like 1,000 pounds that you've been carrying around with you and it's still here. Or maybe for you it's not. It's actually something small that just like a thorn seems to like just kind of keep embedding itself and annoying you and frustrating you, but it's with you even though you'd like it to leave and you want your life to be different. I don't know what it is for you. I can know what it is for me. I just want to ask you to think of it for just a moment. And when you hold that in your head, what is it that you struggle with? What is that like for you? What's that thing? Now hold it in your head. Now here's what I want to do. Here's what I want to tell you. It's wrong. Stop it. Okay, I'm going to do it again. It's not good. Don't do it anymore. Okay, cool. If I turned you out to go home right now, how many of your lives changed? Is that how you change a human heart? I want to ask you that. Just think about it for just a moment. Is the recipe to change a human heart? And here's how you know this. It's not about what's happening right now in this room. Look at your actual life. Did you walk into this room knowing it was wrong and knowing that you needed to change that thing in your life? If you walked in knowing it was wrong and knowing that, then that information was not what you needed to change. That's the difficult thing about change. We always want to treat this like, you know what they need to do? You need to know this so that you can wash it off your hands and be done with it. We want to go to a hand washing moment. We want to go to an outward cleanliness moment. But the reality is most of those things, the reason that they exist is because somewhere in our heart, we're struggling. Somewhere in our heart, there's something that God's actually wanting to wrestle with us and move with us, because it's when the heart begins to change that some of the perspective and things on that starts to change. This is Jesus articulating this whole list and going, you care about all of that. If you care about that, then care about the heart. Because this is the place where real life change begins. When you get this, you get the heart of God for you. And you don't just become a polished religious person with clean hands and a clean bed and clean copper pots and clean everything. You become a real person who's transformed in the likeness of Christ. Because real change happens from the inside out. Jesus is saying you keep trying to wash your hands. But real change, real life change occurs in the heart. And you know why I love this? I wanted to talk about this today, one, because I just think it's actually helpful to articulate this out loud to us as a reminder, and maybe it's new for you, and I think it's important to process that passage, talk about it. But I also wanted to talk about this with you today because this is the thing that I've seen in you. Guys, can I tell you how many people I've started to encounter through this church because of who you all are as a community that have found themselves in places and spaces around here, and they don't say, and I washed my hands. They're not talking about that kind of change. They actually say, and God is actually doing something deep in my heart that I never thought he would or could. Do you know how many times I hear from people in here because of you all, because of the community that this place is, that they open themselves up to the God of the universe in ways that's become transformative, and it's actually changing their real lives on a deep level. It's like profound. I don't have the words to adequately express how in awe of it I am. But it is powerful to see. And it's because of you all. It's because of what God is doing in this place through you, and because of what you're doing in your life. One of my favorite things about being a pastor here at Casas is that for some reason I get to hear stories of life change. Maybe sometimes more frequently than others. I don't know. Maybe it's a perk of what I do. But I get to genuinely experience this, and it's amazing. I got to hear a woman tell me, she said, you know, Ryan, I've been in so many horrible dating relationships because I always enter into a relationship where I try to take, I'm like worried they're not going to like me or love me or that I'm not going to be enough. And so I contort myself into the thing I think they most want me to be so that they'll like me or that they'll love me. And I'll have this. And she goes, and I hate it. I'm always end up resentful. I always end up doing things I don't want to do. I have moments that I violate stuff and I regret things and I compromise things I actually hold and believe and all these things. I don't like it. And she said, I got so frustrated by this. I finally was just like, I'm swearing off relationships altogether because I don't know what to do. And I said, what have you tried to do? And she goes, I've tried to set boundaries. Right? I was like, this is the boundary I need to set, and I just need to hold that. And she goes, but there was always this thing inside of me that always just wanted to shift and morph into whatever that person wanted. She said, I've tried to reach out to people and be like, I'm not going to date somebody before you say okay on this person because I think my picker is broken and I trust you, that kind of a thing. And I've tried to reach out, and she's like, but I still end up with people that I didn't want to be with, and I still find myself in the same situation or the same dynamic. She says, I've even found myself in relationships where on the front end, I make this commitment out loud to somebody, and then as I'm in the relationship, I just start doing this all over again. She's like, I was done with it altogether. She said, but there's something about coming here to Casas and being a part of this community where I finally realized, she said, that I'm actually completely loved and worthy, and that God values me because he made me, and that's how he sees me. And she was like, and it suddenly, like, it hit deep. And I've opened my heart to that. And she said, and it's like the more I open my heart to that, the less I find myself in any way, shape, or form wanting to mold into what somebody else wants me to be. And then she got defiant and looked at me and she goes, because Ryan, I am loved already. And I was like, here's a microphone, enjoy the church. Like, you should teach. Right? Because that's life change. In like a deep way. Did you hear it? It's like her heart is actually moving and changing, and all of that's starting to flow out of her in the most beautiful of ways because she's here with you in that space. I got to hear a man in his 60s tell me that he'd always been harsh and judgmental toward others. And he said that this had been part of the cause of the end of his first marriage, and that he even felt bad for his kids because he knew his kids had grown up in an environment where they never knew where they stood with him. And he could see it, and he could feel himself doing it, and he could watch the anger and watch the frustration happening. And it's like he said, I just didn't know how to stop that. It just kept happening. He said this was even in my workplace. And I'd find myself being a part of like just gossiping or tearing somebody else down because of mistakes they made or because they didn't work hard. I had so much judgment on everybody all the time. And he said at some point in time, I just realized this wasn't working for me. And so I made this commitment. I'm not going to say anything. And I said, and how did that go? And he was like, well, I still had all the same thoughts, and my face said a lot of things to people, and they still knew. So it didn't change anything. And I said, so what changed something? He said, I started coming to this place. I started being a part of this community with you all. And he said, and for the very first time, I realized part of the reason why I have no mercy and no grace for anyone else is because I've never opened myself up to accept grace and mercy for myself. And he said it was in opening myself to that process and just starting to experience it. It's like my heart is softened. He said, I keep crying in moments that I'm not really ready for and weird things, and I don't know what's happening. And he goes, but I just find myself having a whole lot less judgment and a whole lot more criticism. And then he got kind of sheepish. It's kind of awkward. And he said, and you know, at work, I've just started to realize I didn't know what was going on in anybody else's life and why they were making the decisions they were making, just like they didn't know about me. So now, instead of criticizing them, I just pray for them. And he said, it's changed my life because his heart, he opened his heart up in the deepest of places where Christ does his best work, and it began to change him. I sat with a gentleman dressed head to toe in designer clothes. He looked like he walked out of a magazine and landed in my office, like that kind of person. Do you know what I'm talking about? He was so put together and like not a hair out of place, all those things. And he sat down. I'd never talked with him before. I said, so, well, hi, nice to meet you. What's going on? And I commented, I was like, you're like really put together, is what I said. And it's because I just don't encounter people quite like this all of the time. And he goes, yeah, you don't understand. I work in a profession where like you're judged the moment somebody meets you. And you've got to be competent and capable and powerful and demonstrate that you don't fail and all of these different types of things. Because if you don't have that, people aren't going to trust you. They're not going to go with you. And he goes, so I'm good at being able to be this kind of person. And I was like, that's got to be really hard because I bet you there's days where you're not. And he said, no, it's not actually hard. I grew up lying to people all of the time. I grew up in a crazy situation, and I know how to manipulate people so that they see the person in me that they want to see or that I want them to see. And he said, I'm really good at it. And I said, is that what you wanted to come talk with me about? And his eyes flushed with tears, and he said, no, in fact, I hate that. He said, I don't know how to turn it off. And when I find myself sitting in relationships that matter to me, whether romantic or family, he's like, I keep hurting the people I care most about. And the moment something gets honest and the moment something gets vulnerable, I blow it all up. And I do hard things and I hurt other people and I hurt myself and I do all of this stuff. And he goes, I hate that. And I said, is that what you came to talk to me about? And he said, oh no, that's not what I want to talk to you about. I said, okay, well, what is it that what did you want me to know? What did we want? What are we here for? And he said, I just want you to know that I have been coming to this church and I've become a part of this community. And I don't know if you guys realize this, but what you guys are talking about, it actually messes with people. And I said, what do you mean? And he was like, I find myself in this space and then hanging out with other people who go here, and we're talking about things that feel so honest and so vulnerable. And he goes, and for the first time in my entire life, I'm not running or exploding or hurting people or doing those things. I'm like very nervous and holding all of this, but I'm trying to let this happen. He's like, I can feel it changing my life from the inside out. And he said, and I wanted to tell you that that's actually happening because I'm actually doing that in this room because somebody needs to know that. And he looked at me and he goes, so don't screw it up. And I said, oh. And then he was like, that's all I wanted to say. Thank you so much. And he got up and walked out of my office. I know. And you might look and you're like, that's crazy. It's not. I love what that gentleman did. I love what that gentleman said. I know that there's some intensity to it, but I do. And the reason why is because think of what he's doing. He's facing some of the most vulnerable moments of his life on a regular basis by coming and entering into this dynamic with you all, being a church. He's opening up his heart to Christ in ways that he hasn't let anybody else open up in that way. And he's letting you all become an influence as you model that it's safe and trustworthy. And he's asking questions about God and taking steps in his life that he would never otherwise take as he figures out what does it mean to actually change his real life. Isn't that beautiful? I don't have adequate words to describe how much I think that is amazing. That's incredible, friends, and it's because of you. It's because of what God is doing in him. It's because of what God is doing through you in this place. People aren't just showing up here to just clean their hands and polish up and be better behaved religious people. They're coming because they want to be changed from the inside out in the deepest of ways because that's where Christ does his best work. And do you know what God is using you to do? You know what this means? This means that God is using you to create the kind of space and place in the lives of people where he does his best work. And he reaches in, just like he does with me and with you, to actually transform our lives and transform our hearts. He is not done yet, friends. There will be more people to come. There will be more people who need that space and that place. And you all are the kind of community, because of what God is doing in and through you, to meet them in the midst of it. And can I tell you this, beyond just who shows up here, my hope is that you experience it too, just really sincerely. My genuine hope is that it's not just something you hear about, but that you experience it not only in the life of somebody else, but in your own life too. One of the best ways to meet somebody where they're at is to walk your own journey so that you can look at them and say, me too. I'm not you in my own way, me too. And so here's what I wanted to do. Rather than be like, here's 3 steps, I just wanted to close with a benediction here this morning. It's a little longer. I just want to close with a benediction as a way of just saying, this is my hope and my prayer for every single person who attends here, whether you've been here for 40 years or for 40 minutes, when we come to recognize that real life change happens from the inside out. So friends, may you allow God to meet you and love the parts of you that even you have struggled to love. May you open yourself to it. And let the God who is love simply pour that unconditional love out on you and receive it. Take it in. And when you wake up tomorrow, may you do it again. And when you wake up the next day, may you do it again. And when you wake up the next day, may you do it again until it starts to become as natural as breathing itself. May you open your hearts to this beautiful thing that we call grace. This incredible truth that the favor of God, that God actually favors you. May you know that he doesn't just love you, but that he likes you, wants to have relationship with you. And then may that become like an anchor that holds you in your life when other relationships feel insecure and other moments feel like they want to toss you about. May you wrestle, and I mean that word, may you wrestle with the moments where you try to control or deceive or lash out or avoid or whatever that looks like for you. As you open your heart to truly know that God is for you, that God is with you, that God is behind you, and that he is always leading you forward. You are not alone. And may the God of the universe meet you in the depths of your heart and being. May you find the vulnerability and the courage to meet him in that same place. And when you do, may you open yourself up to him, wherever he might lead you, whatever he might do, so that you might see what is yours to see, that you might feel what is yours to feel, that you might know what is yours to know, that you might grow in the ways that only you will grow. And may you know that you don't do this alone. For all of us as a community, when we see transformation, when we see life changing from the inside out and do this together, we become something far more beautiful that looks like the heart of God, not just the washing of hands. And friends, may you know that when a church like us meets people where they are and models what it looks like to see transformation occur from the inside out, it's beautiful. May you see that beauty. May it capture your heart. And in the year to come, may you find yourself saying, I want more. Let's pray. God, we love you. We do. And we thank you for the way that you love us. It's crazy. I thank you for the way that you love us in ways we don't even know how to love ourselves. I thank you for the way that you change us in ways that are so much deeper than washing our hands. And God, I know that's vulnerable and that's scary, and I know that's a hard place for so many people in this room, so I pray your courage. I pray your wisdom. I pray your perseverance in some of those moments. Give us guidance. Give us the audacity to meet you in the midst of those places where you do your best work. And God, help us to know that we are not alone. Teach us what it is to be the kind of church who comes around one another so that we can experience real life change in the deepest of ways. We love you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Friends, before you go, if you're new with us, it's awesome to have you here. My name is Ryan. I'm one of the pastors here. I'm going to be over in this next steps area and would love to meet you, shake your hand, and it's a delight that you're here. And if anybody here has ever wanted to take a next step and you didn't want to have to figure that out all by yourself, we have wonderful people that would love to walk with you and do that over in this next steps area. Any one of them, that would be like the joy of their morning, I promise you, if you go talk with them. And if anything today has stirred something in you where you find yourself going, I would really like it if somebody would pray for me. There's an amazing group of people that show up every week to pray for you. They're over in the prayer room and they would be delighted to partner with you here this morning. So let's keep nailing the drive that we've been doing. And I'm just so glad to be here with you all today, friends. Have a great week. We'll see you soon.